start the timer as well. So the timer is now there. I'm just stick that out of the way. Can everyone see that? Brilliant, 39 minutes. Right, okay. So the very first thing I'm going to do, and I'll switch back to the slides and just remind you of what I've just said, is to create the skeleton, the structure that's going to give us this layout. So I'm just going to start putting that in first in a brand new blank page, and you'll see this take shape as we go along. So let's do that. So I'm just going to create a new file here in Sublime. And I'm going to set, before I even do anything, I'm just going to save this file. So I've got my folder here already. So I'm just going to save this as index.html, and I'll talk later about why it's called that. And I'm just going to start typing the doc type in here. And I think if I, no, let's get this wrong. If I type in HTML and press tab, it completes the rest of the document for me, which is really good, so I don't have to do too much typing. So you remember I've said good developers are lazy. You let the tools do the hard work for you. So that's I've now got like a kind of skeleton page ready to go, which is great. So I'm just going to stick a really quick title in that just says Matt's homepage. It's pretty imaginative, right? And then I'm going to just do a quick hello world in here just to make sure that that's worked. So if I switch back to my browser now just to make sure that that's worked, if I go into Masterclass.
Hello, testing. Hello.
What? I've got no idea what that was. That has nothing to do with anything I'm doing. Is it through there? Okay, sometimes some of the I was terrified. Some of the PA systems in the building are hooked up to different rooms. It was probably someone in one of the other classes. Sorry, that's nothing to do with me. Can I have a few extra minutes for the terrifyingness of that? Okay, anyway, so that was me testing the web page and the audio system. God, that's really scared me. Okay. Just ignore the mysterious voice. Okay, so we've got our basic page there, Hello World, and you can see my title up there as well. So that it's worked, right? We've got something really basic. Now we can start putting in the actual content. So I'm going to use the markup from the grid system that we talked about. So I haven't loaded the grid CSS in yet. This won't do anything, but I'm just laying the framework, the structure now to just give us that basic thing. So I'm going to delete Hello World now that we know the page is ready. So you might remember from the week 2 homework, but the structure of the grid system is to have these rows, and the rows are just containers that always span the full width of the grid, and then the columns that go inside it has to add up to 12, so it's a 12-column grid. So if you look quickly at the structure that we're building here, we've got 2 rows. So there's one at the top which just has this header in it, and then there's one that goes in here that's going to have 3 columns in it. Is everyone with me on that so far? Brilliant. So this is going to be the first one. So I'm just going to have a column inside there. So it's going to have a class of span 12 because this column is going to go the whole width across of the page. So for now I'm just going to put the word header in there. I'm going to come back to this in a sec, but that's just going to be the header of the page. And I can refresh that now, and it's not actually going to do anything. It's just going to say header because the grid system CSS isn't there yet, so it doesn't know anything about that. But that's kind of okay for now. Underneath that, I'm going to have the other row. So again, div class equals row fluid. So this is another row that's going to contain all of that stuff. Now this is going to have 3 columns in it to match that structure here. So we've got 12 columns to play with. Obviously the middle one's like the biggest one. So let's say 4 columns for the left one, 6 columns for the other one, and then no, that still doesn't add up. Let's try it again. Let's do div class equals span. Let's do span 3 for the left column. Let's do div class equals span 2 for the right column. So if someone can do the maths, what's left? What do I need to put in the middle column? 7? Is that right?
Yeah.
Span 7. And that adds up to 12. So in here, that's just going to say content or something. So if I reload that now, we don't get any structure because there's no CSS yet to actually style that up. But hopefully, if I've got all the markup right, that will just work when we load the grid CSS in. So I've kind of got the very, very basics there of my page. That's just got the rows and the columns. I haven't loaded this CSS, but that's the basic skeleton structure that I can now go in and start putting some actual content into this. Is everyone with me on that so far? Is that a question? No, just cool. No worries. Okay. So I said on my slides that the next step after this is to put in some of this semantically coded HTML content. So I want to pop in some of those actual things to flesh the page out to look a bit like this. So I'm going to do that now before we load any sort of CSS. So this stuff here is that semantic HTML. So I've got a heading there about me and a paragraph of text. This is the stuff that's going to sit in that left-hand column. So I'm going to just pop that in there now. So I'll leave the header for now. I'll come back to that in a sec. So I'm going to delete left column and just paste that stuff into it. Now you can see that I've pasted that and it's kind of messed up the indentation, and remember I'm a bit of a fascist about this, so I'm just going to press tab a little bit and put that in the right place, so now that's nicely indented inside here. And I'm also going to make about me a heading. So I'm going to make that a heading 3, and I'll come back to why in a sec. So I'm just going to make heading 3 and then a paragraph. Everyone with me on that so far? Brilliant. So if I reload that now, we should have a nice heading and a bit of text. So it looks all right. I mean, it's not going to win any design awards, but it's, you know, there's something there. We've also got an image here, so I'm just going to put that in. And actually, what I'll do, I'll move the file. So this is the image, and at the moment it's just in this folder called bits. And if you can see that, what I'm going to do is make a new folder using that structure that I talked about before. So I'm just going to go in and no, it's not going to let me do that, is it? Okay, I'll do that within Finder instead. So where are we? I'm just in here. I'm just going to make a new folder called Assets. Inside that folder, I'm going to make a folder called Image, and in there, I'm just going to copy that image of me and stick it into there. Does everyone follow that? So now we've got Assets, Image, and then there we are, map.jpg. So I'm going to insert that image now into that page. So just image source equals, then it's assets/image/map.jpg. I'm going to stick some alt text on it so it's accessible and just say a photo of the author. There we go. And just close that tag. So if I refresh that now, we're probably going to get this pretty good photo of me there. Okay, everyone with me on this so far? Magic. Okay, so I've got a few, 33 minutes. Time flies. Right, I'm going to do the next column now. So the content is the kind of the main body of this, and that's basically all of this. And I've written my life story. It's actually quite embarrassing how much I've written there just to fill this page. So I'm going to select all of that and copy it, and just do the same thing, get rid of the content now and paste all of that in there. So now I've got a bunch of content for my page. Again, it's messed up the indentation, so I'm just going to select all of that and just press tab until it lines up with the previous bit, and now it's all nice and beautifully aligned. Everyone follow this so far? And then my life story, that's also a heading, and it needs to be on the same level as the About Me heading, because they're equal levels or sections of this page, as far as I'm concerned. So that's also going to be an H3. So if I save that and reload it, we should see that content all pop into place. There it is. Everyone follow this so far? Fantastic. And then finally, the last little column. So this has a couple of special bits to it, which I'll pop in now. So I'm going to get rid of the right columns bit and paste that stuff in here. So the heading here is just extra. It's not very exciting, sorry. And then there's a paragraph of text, fix the indentation there. Now this paragraph that I've got selected here, this is the one that's going to load when you click the button, or it's going to animate down when you click the button. I'll leave that for now until I come on to doing the JavaScript part in a little bit. But that, just to forewarn you, that second paragraph is going to animate down if you have JavaScript. Everyone follow that? Cool. So page is starting to take shape now. We've got all the little sections. Still no layout, but I'm going to come to that next. And then the other thing that you might remember from the diagram is this rather fetching list. There's some sort of boxed off list here, and you can kind of see from the layout that the text is flowing around that list, so that might be a bit of a hint about some of the CSS that I'm going to write later on. So I've got that list. It's this list right here, and this is, again, quite arbitrarily, a list of my favourite cyclists, because I'm quite into road cycling. So I'm going to stick that inside the main content area, and I'll explain in a little bit why I'm doing this, but I'm going to put this up here at the very top of that content area, and I'll come back to that in a sec. And also, I'm going to stick that inside a div, and again, I'll talk about that in a sec. So inside that div, I'm just going to stick that list code. Also, that list just consists of list items. I haven't decided yet whether this is an unordered list or an ordered list. I'm going to make it an ordered list because I think it's in some sort of order. So all of those are inside this OL, and I need to give this thing a heading as well. I'm going to give this a heading 4 because this is a sort of subsection within my life story. Sort of. Does that make sense? Is everyone with me on that so far? Brilliant. Okay. So if I save that now and reload it, we can see how it looks. So we've got the list, and again, this is what I mean. Like even without any CSS, the page, you know, it's all right. There's something there. It doesn't look brilliant, but you can kind of see what's going on straight away, which is nice. And if you were to resize this down, it just, apart from the image, the text just kind of scales to fit the page, which is also quite nice. Okay. I've still got header up here, so I should probably put some stuff in there. In the diagram, we've got up here page title and subtitle, and then some sort of menu is going to go there as well. So I'll go and pop something in there for that now as well. So probably the most obvious thing is put heading 1 in here, because this is going to be the main heading for the whole website. So I'm going to just put my name, pretty unimaginative, but it is a website about me. That's going to be the heading 1 for the page. Heading 2 is going to be, I think, the subtitle. This is why I chose heading 3 for the headings further down the page, because I think the most important 2 headings are going to be these ones that go in the header. So this needs to be a subtitle. What can the subtitle be? Matt Andrews, the greatest man that ever lived. This is my website, I can say whatever I want. Okay, so that's our heading and subheading. We also need this little menu goes here, so some sort of links of navigation. So I think this is going to be a list as well, so I'm going to do an unordered list this time. And inside there I'm just going to stick a bunch of list items, and each one of these is going to be a link that's going to go somewhere. Now, I don't know where those links are going to go yet, so I'm just going to put the hash symbol in. That's just a placeholder for links. It won't do anything when you click it. I'm trying to think what sections this website might have. So home is probably an obvious one. Most sites have a home page. I'm just going to copy that line and paste it because a good developer is lazy. As long as there's not a mistake in the line that you're copying, that's bad. And then I'm just going to change these. So home, about me, as if this page isn't enough. Links, we can have a page of links to other websites that I like. And contact me or something like that. That seems like the kind of thing you'd expect to see on a website. So if I refresh that now, we should have that list up there. And again, like even without any CSS, this kind of looks like a page. It's an ugly page, but it's got all of the things you kind of need on it. Is that making sense so far? Are there any really quick questions so far? Brilliant. Okay. 12 minutes in, it's not bad. Okay, so if I go back to my little guide of what I'm going to do next, and now we're kind of at step 2 here. We've got the semantically coded HTML content. We've actually got all of the bits of the page are kind of there now in terms of the code, or just about there. The next step is to actually make it look nice. So probably the very first thing to do is load in the grid, because the grid's going to straight away give it some structure that it really doesn't have here. So let's do that. So in my little cheat sheet here, I've actually got a link to the grid CSS that we used in week 2. So I'm just going to copy that and just literally load that up in my browser. And it gives me 400. Okay, that's fine. I've got a copy of that somewhere else. Sorry, bear with me 1 sec. It's definitely not going to help me on my time. Yeah. So what I'm doing here is just going through code that I've saved on a website called GitHub, which I'm going to talk a little bit about later on. But this just has, it's a way of just storing code for reference in the future. There we go, grid flow. This is what I was trying to load. Okay, so this is the same grid stuff that we saw in week 2. So I'm going to just create a new file and just paste all of that in. That's all the grid magic. Now I'm going to save this. This is what I was saying before. I'm going to save this in this assets folder that I made, but I'm going to make a new folder in there called CSS, and all my CSS that I write is going to go in this folder. And I'm just going to call this grid.css. I saw a few people saving CSS files and other files with spaces in the name. You can do it, but I'd advise you not to, because sometimes on the web, obviously you don't see spaces in web addresses themselves. You know, google.co.uk, there's no spaces there. It's good practice is to either use what I was calling camel case, where you might say grid fluid like that with the capital F to distinguish between words. You could do grid fluid with an underscore, you could do grid dash fluid. All of those are better than doing grid space fluid, because the code can sometimes get a bit mixed up, so that's just a little aside. I'm just going to call this grid.css. Any questions on this so far? Cool. So next step is to load that CSS into this document. So that's a link tag. So it's link rel equals style sheet. This is the relationship that this link's going to have to the page. It's just a style sheet. The type of this style sheet is going to be text/CSS. That's just the kind of CSS. This is just boilerplate. This is just code that you have to write. The media of this is going to be screen. So I want to load this CSS for anything with a screen. You don't have to specify that, but it's nice to just be quite complete about it. And then finally, the kind of important bit, the href. This is where this link actually lives. Where does this CSS file exist? So it's going to be assets/CSS, 2 S's, and then grid.css, and then we just close that tag. Does everyone remember that from week 2? Everyone seen that before? Brilliant. So if I've got everything right, when I refresh this page, this should suddenly become a grid. Hey, there we go. Now, obviously, it doesn't look brilliant, and the photo's kind of gone a bit crazy, but we'll sort that out. But in principle, we've got that grid structure that I was going for on the diagram here. It's roughly the same proportions. It should resize as we scale the browser down, which it does. Yeah, any questions on that? Or does that look about right to everybody? Apart from my massive face overlapped on the text. I'll fix that. One thing as well, when I sent that grid CSS round to everybody, I modified it slightly by just sticking a little border on each of the columns, just so you can see that it had worked. I don't want that in this actual final design. I just wanted that so you could see, check that it worked, basically. So I'm just going to find that line in the code, and it's this line here where it says outline 1 pixel solid, and then C is just this color of this grey thing. So I'm just going to delete that line, and now the grid should just lose those borders. Everybody follow that? So the grid's still there, I've just hidden the outlines to make it a bit easier on the eyes. Okay, so what I want to do now with the time I've got left is format this page to make it look a little bit nicer, a little bit more like a web page. And I'm going to do that by creating a new CSS file separate from the grid. So I'm not going to touch the grid file again now, that's it, done. And I'm just going to call this one style.css. So there's nothing in it now, but I've saved it in the same place as my other CSS file with the grid. So because I've done that, I need to load it into the page. So I'm just going to select all of this existing link element, and stick another one in underneath, and just change grid.css to say style.css. Now it's going to load my CSS that's going to style this page. Does everyone follow that so far? Brilliant. So that doesn't do anything on its own because I haven't written any CSS yet. But the very first thing I might do is actually make the page a little bit narrower, because at the moment it's filling the whole width of the screen, which isn't great for readability. So I'm going to just make everything a little bit smaller. So I'm going to do that in my style CSS file, and I'm going to do that by just literally selecting the body of the page. So this will get literally everything that's inside the body, and I'm just going to go width, let's try 50%. I'm just going to save that, reload it, and straight away the page is now 50% of the width of the screen. So if you resize the browser, it's always going to be half of the space that's available. Now 50% probably feels a little bit too much in this case, so what we can do is use the developer tools. So I'm just going to right click on the page and go inspect element, and should be able to find the body just here, and you can see my CSS there. It tells me it's in style.css, and it says width 50, so I can just click into that and literally just use the arrow keys here to just increase that and get it to a point where I'm happy. So I think let's try 75%. I feel like that's a bit more readable. It's not as small as 50, so I'm quite happy with that. And that's the great thing about the developer tools. I can just make that here and just see how it looks, and then now go back to my code and say, right, let's make this 75% instead. And now that's done. I also think I want this to be centered on the page, because it looks a bit strange having it kind of just off to one side. So let's see if we can change that. I'll talk a little bit about what this is doing a bit later on, but this is kind of not quite magic, but this line, margin 0 auto, this basically sets the margins of the page to have no space above and below, but on the left and the right it's auto, and all auto means is it will calculate how much space to give each the left and the right hand side of the page based on the space that's available to it. So it's easy to illustrate if I just refresh the page. So what it's done, it's worked out that the body of the page is now 75% of the available width. So by saying make margin left auto and margin right auto, it will just divide whatever space is left equally between the two of them, which effectively centers the page. So now if I resize that page, it will always just fill the remaining space, or it will always sit in the middle of those two things. And also it feels a bit close at the top here, so actually I'm going to change that 0 to be 20 pixels. So now it's going to have, if you watch when I refresh this, everyone see that it moved down 20 pixels, and at the bottom it's moved up a bit, so there's now a bit of a gap here. Just gives the page a bit of breathing room. Okay, 20 minutes, I need to keep moving. So the next thing I want to do here is make this look a little bit nicer visually. So I'm going to use some colours. So I'm not a designer, and my eye for colour isn't fantastic, but luckily there's loads of tools on the web to make this a bit easier. So I know we used that colour picker website the other week, but this is a really nice tool that Adobe makes called Colour, and the way I use this is just clicking the Explore tab, and it's got all these colour schemes that other people have created that you can just download and use. So if we go on most popular, we usually get some quite nice ones in here. Let's see one that looks quite nice. Pomegranate Explosion, sounds exciting. God, there's even a comment search, you can even comment on Pomegranate Explosion. And somewhere in here there's a way to get, I think if you click edit, you get the actual, yeah, here we go. You might not be able to see this, but in that little box there is the hex code that you use in your HTML to reproduce that colour. So I'm going to use these colours to make up my web page. I'm going to just drop a few of them in. Now it might look terrible, as I say, I'm not a designer, so let's see if we can get something that looks okay. So I'm going to start with this one. I've just copied that, you can't really see that, but I've copied that code for this sort of, I don't know what shade you'd call that, sort of a creamy sort of colour, but I'm going to use that as the background colour for the whole page. So what I'm going to do, because the body of my page is now just within these margins here, I'm going to set a background colour on the HTML element, which is the whole page itself. So the body is kind of inside the HTML element. This would make more sense if I just show you what I mean. So if I select the HTML element and just do background colour, I'm just going to paste that code in. It needs to have a hash at the start as well, like that. if I do this, if it works, it should make the entire background color of the page use that color. If I was to just show you what that would have looked like if I did that to the body of the page, it will. Oh no, it's the same thing. Oh, okay, never mind. Let me come back to that in a sec. If I make the body background color red, it's going to do that. So the body, you can now see the body is 75% of the width of the page, and then the HTML is the whole thing itself, and that's this color. Does everyone kind of follow me on that? So obviously I don't want it to be red, so I'm going to choose a nice color from here. Let's try this blue sort of turquoisey thing. Let's see if that's a bit nicer. This might look a bit awful, I'm sorry, as I say, I'm not a designer, but hopefully it'll look slightly better. Yeah, it's okay, it's not beautiful, but we'll go with it. Okay. Also, because this text has got a background colour, it's now all the way close to the edges, so I'm going to stick a bit of padding just inside the body itself. So if I just do padding, let's try 20 pixels and see if that looks a bit better. Can everyone see what that just did? It added a bit of space around, so now that text isn't quite as close to the edge, which I think looks a little bit nicer. Okay, let's use a different colour for the header. Let's try, God, what would look least awful? Maybe this sort of pale red here. So I'm going to make the heading area, which is this part here, I'm going to give that a different colour. So what that means is I need some way to select that in my HTML. I need a way of saying select that thing so I can start applying styles to it. So that's this div here. This contains basically my header. So I could use these row fluid classes and span 12 classes to add styling to, but that would be a bad idea because they're part of the grid, and I don't want to start adding colours and stuff into the grid because the grid should just be about the grid. So I'm just going to add a class in here that's just called header. Now that doesn't do anything on its own, that won't make any difference to the page, but now I've got a separate class that I can use just to select this bit at the top here. So let me do that now. So if I just do dot header, that's going to select that element basically. And now I can do background color and just put that hex code in. And let's see if this looks absolutely awful. It's not beautiful, but let's go with it. And again, the same thing. The text is now kind of butting up against the edge of that box. So I'm also going to stick 20 pixels of padding in here as well, which pushes out the other side. Okay, do you know what? Let's see if I can do this really quickly. This is not a hack, but no. Okay, I'll come back to that. I'm running low on time. I'll fix that slightly later on. Not there. Okay. Anyways, we've got a page that looks kind of all right. I think that's enough for colour. But what I want to do is get some of the layout a little bit better. So what I actually like doing when I'm doing this is actually doing some of my CSS straight in the browser and just seeing how it looks on the page, getting to a point where I'm happy, and then I'll go and save that code properly. So I can actually do that in here. If I click on sources, this is the Chrome developer tools. I can actually look in there, and it's actually got my folder structure on the left over here, so I can click into those files and see what's going on. And you can actually go in here and edit these files, so I can change that. I can change the padding, for example, and you can see it sort of taking effect there. So I'm just going to add a bit, make that bigger so everyone can see it. So the first thing I want to do is actually make this menu look a bit more like a horizontal navigation menu rather than the one we've got there, which means I need some way of selecting it, a bit like I just added this header class to that heading area. I need a way of selecting this menu because I can't just select ULs because I probably want to use ULs somewhere else on the site. So I'm going to add a class to that of menu. So now if I refresh my page, I can come in here and I could do something like menu, and then I could do background color red or something just to make sure I've got the right thing, which I have, so I can get rid of that. And what I probably want to do is select the list items in the menu, and I want to do list style none, which will get rid of the bullet points. I'm going to turn off the padding and margin for these items just to start with. I also need to do that on the UL itself, which will look like this. So when I talked about using a CSS reset, you can actually use one of those to get a similar sort of effect to this. It just kind of turns off all of those values. In fact, I don't even need to say PX there because 0 doesn't need any units. But basically, I'm turning off all of the spacing around these items. And then finally, I want these things to sit next to each other, so I can actually do something like we did in week 2. I can make them float left, so this sticks them all in a line. Can everybody see that? Now, I probably do want a bit of space between them, so what I'm going to do is just do margin right. Let's do 20 pixels, because I've been using that in a lot of places. And I might even stick a little border between them, like I was doing with the stuff in week 2. So I'm just going to do border right. Let's try 1 pixel solid line, and let's make it CCC, which is probably a bit light, but I can change that later. So I don't know if everyone can see that, but there's a little kind of dividing line there between each one. Now it needs a bit of padding to allow for that border. So if I make the padding 20 pixels, that should be roughly in the mid, well, exactly in the middle between each one. Now looking at that, it looks to me like the gap between those items is a bit high, so I'm going to change that to be 10 pixels, and then I think that's a little bit nicer. We've also got this border at the very end of the last item, which we probably don't want. So we can select that using CSS3. We can go menu li last child, and this is going to select just the last one. And again, you can do things like set the background color or something just to check that it's done what you think it's done. So you can see there it has selected the last item in the menu, and here I can just go border right none, and it will turn that border off. Did everybody see that? Just neatens things up a little bit. I probably also want to make the font a little bit more interesting, but I'll do that in a separate section. So what I'm going to do here is just literally select that code I've just written in the developer tools and just copy it, and just literally go to my CSS here and just paste that in at the end. There is actually a way within the developer tools that you can save these files directly from here, but to avoid getting too confusing, I'm not going to do that for now. So if I reload the page, it should have that change in it. I'm going to come back and do some colors in a sec. The other thing I want to do layout-wise is make this list sit like it is in here, where it's inside this box. So again, in order to do that, I need a way of selecting that element in my CSS. So I've got this div here. So I'm just going to add a div, add a class to that. I'm just going to call that fave-cyclists, like that. And I'm also going to add a class here to this OL, this list of cyclists, that's just going to be called cyclists. I think it's a little bit ambiguous, but hopefully I'll remember what I've done. So the very first thing I want to do is make that favorite cyclists list look like it does here. So it needs to sit off to one side, and it needs to have some sort of border or something going on. Everyone with me so far? Brilliant. 13 minutes. So I'm going to do something down here of fave cyclists, and I'm going to just do float right, which will get us pretty close actually on its own. I think it will make that thing sit off to one side, and that gets us quite near to what we wanted. I'm going to give it an explicit width, because at the moment it's only as wide as the longest name that's inside it, so I want to make it a bit more specific. So I'm going to say width. Let's try 30%. That might be too small, but we can try it. Yeah, it's a little bit small. Let's try 40%. There we go, that's not too bad. And I want to give it a background color, which I'll take from this color thing. So I'm going to copy this color here and just go in here and do, sorry, one sec. So if you can see that. Background color, and I'm just going to put that code in. And also a bit of padding in here as well, maybe 10 pixels padding inside the box. There we go, so that looks awful, but I'm also going to stick a bit of margin on it, because you can kind of see there the text here is kind of really butting up against that box. So I'm going to stick some margin, which is space outside the box, on this list to give that a little bit of breathing room. So I'm just going to do margin left of 10 pixels, so it's got space on the left, and margin bottom of 10 pixels as well. And that should now, did everyone see that? I gave it a bit of space around the box, which is great. So it's starting to take shape. I do need to sort out this image of me, because as lovely as my face is, it probably shouldn't be overlapping this text. So I'm going to just select that image as well and add a class to that. So I'm just going to, I'll do this on a new line. I'll make this a little bit more readable so you can see what's going on. You don't have to line things up like this, but I just find it makes it a bit easier to read. I'm going to give it a class of full width. The idea of this, just that class is something I might be able to reuse in different places. So all I'm going to do for that class, full width, is say max width 100%, and I talked about this the other week. So all that's going to do when I reload this page, that image will now be the width of whatever the thing it's in. So this is now, on here, it's as wide as the column that it's in, and if I change the width of the column, the image is going to grow. But because it's max width, the image will never get bigger than the actual image is itself, so it's never going to stretch my face. It's only going to, if I'd made it width 100%, it would just grow indefinitely, but by setting max width 100, it will scale, but once it reaches the image's actual dimensions, it won't go any bigger than that, which is fine for the purposes of this, because it's not going to get any bigger. That was quite a big image to start with. So if I scale this page down, you should see that image just kind of resizes to fit. And I think I talked about this in week 2 or week 3 or something. So we're getting there, right? It doesn't look gorgeous, it's not going to win any awards, but we can do something with it. Now I do need to improve the typography on this page a little bit, so let's do a bit of that. And again, something like type and fonts is a lot easier to do in the browser while you're looking at the page like this, so I like to do this in the tools. So the first thing I'm going to do is make these paragraphs look a little bit nicer because they're really quite hard to read at the moment. So I'm going to select all of the paragraphs on the page, and I'm just going to do, let's change the font first. So I do like a bit of Georgia font, so I'm going to put Georgia in there first. Hopefully everyone saw that, but now it's changed the font to Georgia, which I think is nice. In terms of the font size, it's using the browser's default font size, which might be different on different browsers, so I'm going to be explicit here and set it to 18 pixels, which is quite large. Now, I don't know about you, but I think that the what we call the line height there, the space between lines, is quite small. It's quite tight to read, so I'm going to just add in a line height here. And the great thing about line height is it doesn't need any units. If I make it 2, the line height will just be twice the height of the font. So if the font here is 18 pixels, the line height of 2 is going to just be double 18 pixels, and that's how big the gap is between lines. Everyone follow me on that. I think 2 is probably a bit much, but you can use decimals here, so I could try 1.2. See, that feels quite tight, maybe 1.5. Bit much. 1.3 maybe? 1.4. I think that looks okay. And I'm also going to increase the gap between paragraphs because it feels like that gap isn't big enough based on that line height. So I'm just going to do at the bottom here, margin bottom of every paragraph. Let's try 20 pixels. That's not much bigger. Let's try 30. 40. That's too small. 30 pixels. I think that looks slightly more readable than it did before. Does everyone agree? Brilliant. So again, I'm just going to copy that CSS that I've just written here in the browser and just save that somewhere in my CSS code here. And you know what I might do as well? I might just do something similar with all of the headings on the page because at the moment they're just using the default browser font, which I'm not a big fan of. So I'm just going to be really lazy and select all of the headings. So heading 1, comma, heading 2, comma, heading 3, heading 4. I think they're all the ones that I've got on the page. But I could do the whole heading 5, heading 6 if I wanted to. And all I'm going to do is just give them all the same font family, which is Arial. I don't want a serif font like these ones for the main heading text. So you can see it's changed all of those different headings. Now at the moment this has got default browser styling. In fact, let me just save this first before I move on. This has got default browser styling kind of loaded into it. So those headings have got like some spacing around them. Like you can see there's a bit of a gap here between all of these headings and everything that comes after them. Or you can see it between those headings at the top there. This is where you might want to use a CSS reset, and I'll just show you by quickly applying a reset, applying a reset to this page, what that will do to the page that we've got. So if I've cheated a bit and I've got a link here to that reset style sheet that I mentioned. So there's a big chunk of CSS here. So if I do the same thing, if I just save that file in the same place as my other CSS files, I'm just going to call it reset.css. And then now if I go back to my page and add another link tag here, well actually I'm going to add it at the start because you want to load the reset right at the beginning, otherwise it will reset some of your own stuff, and just call that reset. So to make this a bit easier to see what's going on, I'm just going to copy that tab. So this is what it looks like without the CSS reset, and this is what it looks like with. So you can kind of hopefully see what's happened there, but anything that I haven't explicitly styled myself in the code I've just written gets reset. So all of those headings up here, extra, about me, they lose all of their formatting. The heading 1 and the heading 2 up here, they lose their style, and now they just become normal text. And the point is that now it will look like this in every browser now, rather than using, in this case, Chrome's default CSS for those headings. And then now I can go in and restyle those things to myself however I want. It resets all of the lists as well. So this list that I worked with has kind of stayed the same. It's still got the same gaps and stuff, but this other list that I didn't do anything to has now been reset, so it loses all of its spacing and its numbers. Now, in this case, I don't actually want it to do that because that kind of works for me, and also I'm running out of time. So I'm actually not going to use the reset in this case, but that's just to show you what it would do to this page, and sometimes that is what you want, and like if you don't want all of these browser defaults kind of getting in your way. But for now, I am going to take that out. Is there any questions on that, or anyone confused by that? No? Cool. Okay. So we've got this page, and it's got almost all of the stuff on it. The only thing that it doesn't have that was on my little document here was this interactive thing, and I've got 5.5 minutes to go, so I'll see if I can squeeze that in as well. So the way that I wanted this to work, I'm going to use JavaScript to do that. And what I was saying was, there's going to be a button somewhere in that column, and when you click on that button, it's going to show you this paragraph of text. And the paragraph is this paragraph here. Is everyone with me on that so far? Now, obviously there isn't a button here, so one of the steps is going to be to add that button in. And I'm also going to use jQuery to do this, just like we used it in the homework task and last week's lesson. So again, I've got a little quick link here for myself for jQuery, so I'm just going to go and download that. Obviously, you don't need these links. Like, you can just Google jQuery and you can go to the website and download it yourself from here, and it's very clear how that works. Also, as a really boring aside, there's an American football player called Jake Weary, and it says on Wikipedia not to be confused with jQuery. So that was quite funny. So I'm going to copy that and then make a new file. So this is jQuery in all its glory, and I'm just going to save that in the assets folder, but make a new folder inside there called JS, like I was saying before, and I'm just going to call this jQuery, spelled properly, .js. Everyone with me on that so far? So I've got a copy of jQuery. Now I need to load that into my web page. I'm going to just do that just under these link tags here. So script type equals text/JavaScript, and the source, this is where the file lives, is assets/js/jQuery.js. Close that tag. I'm also going to copy and paste that because I'm going to write my own JavaScript, again, like we did last week, in a separate file just called script.js. So I'm just going to create that file now and just stick it in the same place, assets.js, script.js. And then just to check that worked, I'm going to just alert the text hello. So if that's all worked, when I reload this page, we should see hello pop up. Hello, there we go. Okay, so that's worked. So now I need to do the stuff with the button. So first I need to actually add that button to the page. So let's do that. So this is the extra section. So I want it to be a button here, so just a button element that says something like show more. And then this paragraph is the paragraph that's going to appear when you click that button. So there's a couple of things we need to do here. So I'm going to give the button an ID of show more. And I talked about IDs. If you give an element an ID, it's saying there's just one of that element on the page. So where you might use a class, you can use classes all over the place, and that they're designed to be reused. An ID means there's just one of those things on the page, so we're going to only have one show more on this page. And the paragraph ID is just going to be more info. So the other thing is that this button isn't going to, like, if I load that page now, hello, we've got a button. The button doesn't do anything yet, and there's the paragraph. And what I want to happen is, if you have JavaScript switched on, you don't see this paragraph, and you see the button, and when you click the button, the paragraph will appear. Does that make sense so far? Good. But if JavaScript isn't available, or it's not loaded or anything like that, the button shouldn't be there, because the button isn't going to do anything for people who don't have JavaScript, and the paragraph should be there, so the logic is kind of flipped around. So in order to do that, what I want to do is to hide this button by default. So I'm going to add a class to the button of hidden. Now hidden doesn't do anything. I can reload that. It doesn't actually do anything. But I'm going to create a class now in my CSS for hidden, and all that hidden is going to do is just use display none, which means something is hidden, not on the page. So if I refresh this now, the button isn't there, which is great. So by default, this is what I mean about unobtrusive JavaScript. If someone comes to the page and they can read all of that text. But now, if people who do have JavaScript, they're going to get into my code that I'm going to write here. And this is where I'm going to write a bit of jQuery, similar to how we did last week. So this is just this document ready check that says, has the page loaded? And then in here, I'm going to get some references to these elements. So the first one is the button. It's got an ID of show more. So I'm going to select that button. So var button equals, and then I'm just going to put a hash, and then show more. And that's going to select the element that has an ID of show more. So that's the button. And then I'm going to copy that and just create another variable called p, which is that paragraph. And oh, sorry, show more was the button, and more info was the ID of the paragraph. So that's going to just go more info. Everyone with me on that so far? A minute and 37 left. So the way this is meant to work is when the page loads, if JavaScript is enabled, this paragraph should be hidden. So let's do that first. So I'm just going to do p.hide, it's a jQuery method. So when you load the page now, the paragraph is hidden, and that happens so quickly you can't even see it happen. And then I also want the button to be visible because we want the user to click the button, so I'm just going to do button.show. So if you have JavaScript, we've hidden the button with CSS but then shown it with JavaScript. So now you've got the button. Now it still doesn't do anything, so we need to wire it up, and this is what we were doing in last week's task. So we can do button.click and then a function, and then in here we can just do p.slide toggle. This is that function that we used last week, and when you click on that, it should make that paragraph slide into place like that, and it toggles it. So depending on whether it's visible or invisible, it toggles it and animates it in. And the goal there is that if you load this page with JavaScript disabled, which you can do here in the developer tools, and if I refresh this page, there we go, the button isn't there because the button's been hidden by CSS, and it's only in the JavaScript that we show the button, but obviously JavaScript doesn't run now because it's disabled, so that never happens. So the button is hidden, and the paragraph that we've hidden in JavaScript never gets hidden because the JavaScript doesn't run, So the paragraph is just there. And this is what I mean by an unobtrusive JavaScript experience, because now when you come to that page, you can still get to that content. It's not hidden. But if you come to the page and you do have JavaScript, then you get this little extra enhancement where you can click that to load the page. And I think with 5 seconds to go, that is a basic web page in 40 minutes. There we go. Thank you. Thank you. Now, obviously, there's a few other things I need to do here to improve that. Let me just pause that recording before I go insane.